Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel session, which I think is going to be very exciting. We will discuss the interconnection between journalism and digital news content creation, and we will explore how digital content creation is transforming the journalism landscape and how content creators and journalists can learn from each other. And to discuss that, we have the best speakers you could imagine. We have two journalists that have switched to digital content creation. And on the other side, we have two digital content creators / YouTubers that are doing journalism. And I will introduce them to you in a second. But before that, I just want to say a few more words about this session. As Summer said when she introduced me, I'm working for UNESCO. I'm the head of Unit for Media Information Literacy, and one of the reasons why I'm here is that, okay, apart from the fact that I really wanted to be part of this conference for the first time, is the fact that we have embarked with Austin and the Night Journalism Center on a really incredible project, which is to develop a massive online course for digital news content creators and journalists to foster the exchanges between these two categories of actors and see what they can learn from each other. We see more and more journalists and more and more journalists that are becoming content creators and that are creating their own social media channels. And at the same time, we see an increasing number of content creators that focus on news reporting and that get a much bigger outreach than some traditional media outlet. There are many reasons to explain that phenomenon, and we've discussed that, we've heard that already yesterday in some of the panel discussion. But one of the reasons is that people are increasingly looking for a personalization of information. A recent survey of the Financial Times called Next Generation News 2030 shows that news consumers place greater emphasis on the personal relation or the affinity of the person that has produced or disseminated the information in order to evaluate the trustworthiness of an information. So one question I have here today is, what can journalists learn from content creators in terms of building trust with an audience through an engaging format, proximity with the community, personalized content? But at the same time, what can and what should content creators learn about the responsibilities that come with having a wide outreach? And in particular, what can they learn from the professional standards of the media profession? So let me introduce our speaker. We have Salla-Rosa Leinonen. She is a producer, storyteller, and social media professional from Finland. Interesting for our conversation today, she actually works for the Finnish broadcasting company Yle. She is currently working as a producer for Yle Kioski, where she's responsible for the society and news-focused teams creating content on social media. For Yle Drama, she produced a web series for young audiences. We have also Sam Ellis. He's a journalist, director, editor, and animator based in New York City. From 2016 to 2023, he was a senior producer at Vox Video. He was producing the hugely popular video series Vox Atlas, for which he earned an Emmy nomination. After that, he's moved to social media and content creation. He is currently the creator and showrunner of Search Party, an independent video journalism project that investigates and decodes the most important and complicated news around geopolitics and global sports in an accessible and engaging visual style. Search Party has gained more than 330,000 subscribers in its first 7 months after creation. We now also have María Paulina Baena. She's a Colombian journalist and political scientist who moved from traditional media to social media. She's co-creator and presenter of La Pulla, an opinion program of the newspaper El Espectador that today has 1.35 million subscribers on YouTube. She's the winner of the Simon Bolivar Prize for Journalism and listed as one of the 5 best young journalists in the world by the One Young World organization in England. And last but not least, we have Hugo Travers. Hugo is the founder of Hugo Décrypte, a French media startup that delivers news largely aimed at young audiences. Hugo started 8 years ago a university student's YouTube channel. Today he has 14 million followers across its social media accounts, 200 million monthly views on TikTok, and another 35 million views on YouTube. Hugo Décrypte's Instagram account has more followers than Le Monde, and its daily news update is the most downloaded podcast in the country. Hugo hosted nearly all the candidates running for presidency in 2022 in France, and also President Macron. And he has just launched his own media channel. So welcome to the 4 of you, and maybe a round of applause. And we will start with the presentation of Salla-Rosa. Please, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Salla-Rosa and I'm super happy to be here. I just realized that I have a wrong date on my slides, so sorry about that. I'm one day in, it's 13th I would say. But anyways, I'm here to talk about how social media influencers are reshaping media landscape, and we know that social media influencers have a huge impact on our media lives. Especially younger audiences spend most of their daily lives on social media, and especially like influencers have a huge impact on their lives. Just a practical question, is this the clicker? Yes, thank you. Of course, when we are on these social platforms as journalists, we are competing basically with the same audiences as these social media influencers. And that is why, of course, we should be interested in what kind of impacts social media influencers and what kind of power social media influencers hold. And also, social media influencers deal with similar topics than journalists do. So that is also a very important point, that how can we as journalists do it as interestingly as social media influencers do. I'm sorry, I don't know, this is not working. How do you click on this? Voila, thank you, and sorry about that. So that is the reason why I asked can journalists be influencers? So I did a fellowship at the LSE Polis, a media think tank of London School of Economics, and I wrote a paper about what can we learn from influencers as journalists. And I also tried to define kind of an archetype of so-called journalist influencer as well. So I wanted to find out through research what kind of power does influencers hold, and of course learn what kind of ways of giving the information we could take into account when we do our journalism. I'm pointing out some main findings of the research paper, but if you want to learn more, of course, go and read the paper. This is published in 2022, so it's already 2 years old, but it's very relevant still. Journalists often speak from authority, from like up to down in a way, while influencers speak more kind of friend-like, they are more approachable, or they feel more approachable than journalists usually do, especially like if we think of traditional journalism. And they also build like more closer connections with the followers. I wanted to also find out, like, through what kind of research information we have on what kind of power influencers hold. So, of course, the kind of kind of very obvious one is that influencers can recommend things that people want to buy. But also influencers, according to one research, influencers can make people seek more information, which is, of course, a great thing. A Finnish research highlights that if you kind of mix political content with lifestyle content, it can bring more attention to the political content, which is kind of like a genre mix, I would say. So this is also a way of kind of how they can emphasize political content within the more like lifestyle content. So should journalists be as authentic as influencers are? And I wanted to also find out what people are actually expecting from influencers. So according to one research, there are still like these kind of very dominant kind of ideas of what is real journalism or what is a real journalist, but still quite a lot of these expectations towards journalists and content creators were quite the same. So there was a need for authenticity, transparency, genuine engagement, a promise of quality content, and it is like coming well-pacedly and it is consistent. Also, these are findings from different research papers that I wanted to point out what kind of things people are actually expecting from influencers. And I think you can, as journalists, you can look at this list in a way that what can I take in my journalism when I do it on social platforms. For example, can I be more personal? Can I be more relatable, for example? All of this you can, of course, find from the paper if you want to look at more in detail. I also wanted to see what kind of different things, what makes influencers and journalists the same in a way from audience's point of view, and what makes them very different. And I was looking at this question through these 5 questions, so how the employment and the income differ from different kind of creators on social media platforms. What are the aims for the content creation? What kind of rules or guidelines do these creators follow? How well the content creation is planned, and who benefits from the content creation? I defined different categories of different kinds of content creators on social media. And this is just a list or kind of a graph to show that there are like various different kind of content creators on social media platforms. And actually, like to point out, there are like social media activists, influencers, journalist influencers, and traditional journalists, as I define them. But in the end, when you think about all of these different creators on social media platforms, from the audience's point of view, I skipped one. From the audience's point of view, actually, these different creators are quite the same. So basically, what the biggest differences are that how the content, what kind of rules and guidelines do they follow, where they get their income. But these are things that most of the followers or the audience wouldn't know, because if it's not disclosed in the content. So I think that it's very important to understand that all of these kind of different content creators on social media platforms, from the audience's point of view, don't really look that different. I try to sum up what I mean when I'm talking about a journalist influencer. So it has or they have a personality-driven style. They have a deep understanding of their target audience. They specialize or have a very special expertise in something. They have a unique tone of voice. They are very approachable, and they are present to their followers. Some things that content creation usually has is that they are interactive, responsive, relevant to the followers. They blend like familiar things and also do innovative things. They empower their followers, being present with them and communicating with them. They adopt trends and also make some bold choices. Of course, we have the clear issue here that many editorial guidelines, for example, clash with the social media platforms' different guidelines. These rules are, of course, making many traditional media outlets back away from social media platforms. But do we really have time from the audience's point of view to wait for a certain legislation or guidelines when there is such a massive need for reliable information on social media platforms, especially for the younger audiences? And I would like to end up in a note to think what kind of democracy are we looking at later if journalistic media is not present on social media platforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salla-Rosa. This was the perfect introduction to many of the questions we are having in relation to content creators, news content creators, and journalists. So now I'll give the floor to Sam to go more deep dive in a concrete example. So Sam, do you want to stay here, or you want to go to
I'll just do it quickly
you
right
stay
here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce myself and my work a little more. I'm super thrilled to be on this panel in particular because I'm actually currently transitioning from a more traditional journalist company to a more independent content creator role. So I was at Vox for about 7 years. I ran a YouTube series there called Vox Atlas. I also did a number of TV shows there. Last summer, though, I left Vox and teamed up with a friend of mine and former colleague, Johnny Harris, who is a successful YouTube journalist in his own right. And we launched a new channel called Search Party. And Search Party is an independent YouTube channel. It covers a spectrum between geopolitics and sports. And so I've learned a lot over the last 7 months about the differences between the two. And two things come to mind at first when I think about it. The first is pace. Independent content creators, journalists just need to create a lot more, a lot faster. It's been an adjustment for me. To put that in perspective, when I was at Vox, I had about 4 to 6 weeks to do a video, so enough time to do thorough journalism to take on big topics. At Search Party, we try and publish about every 3 to 4 weeks, so close to half the time, and that's even slow for YouTube. And so I've learned a lot about workflow efficiency, but there is a trade-off there, and I think that does change a lot about the journalism that I do. But the other thing I think about when going independent is the kind of coverage you can do. So as I mentioned, Search Party covers this spectrum between geopolitics and sports. Our sweet spot, though, is a story that's in the middle. So, you know, something like how Saudi Arabia is using sports, hosting sports events to further their geopolitical goals. I think that's pretty cool. I think if that beat in a traditional journalist company might be a weird fit, but for a YouTube channel, it works really well. It's unique enough that I think people are interested in and they subscribe to it. But again, that spectrum is broad enough that I think we will can attract a larger subscriber base than if we were to be a singular topic. So this is just a little bit of my work. But yeah, the main thing is how do you go from a traditional journalist model to this independent, scrappier style while trying to keep the journalism the same. And so I'm excited to learn from my fellow panelists about how to do that.
Well, thank you, Sam. And maybe before we go to the story of the others, I will ask you just a few additional questions, if you don't mind. You speak about the pace and how fast for you this is one of the main change. How then does this, like affect the standards? Like, because you have an education or you have been working as a journalist, so do you still or do you adhere to some standards, professional standards? How is your, relation in relation to that?
Yeah, I mean, I remain committed to the journalism, the tactics that I learned at Vox. I think the best example is that the pace affects the kind of topics we can cover. A good example is the war in Gaza. So when that started, we're a geopolitical channel. The thing to do would have been to explain the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I only have 3 to 4 weeks to do a video. So for me, can I do that responsibly? For me, it's a big task. So instead, what we did was we try and find smaller angles to the stories. So we ended up doing a story explaining how the Arab governments have been normalizing with Israel and how this puts them in a bind. So that's kind of a good example of how the time constraints were put in actually pushes us to do different kinds of topics, but that allows us to remain responsible in our journalism.
And the follow-up question, we've seen in the presentation of Salla-Rosa the lists, right, about, like what people are expecting from digital news content creator or from content creators. What do you think about that? Like, do you have a personal relation with your audience, or how do you explain that you've been able to build such a big audience in such a short period of time?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things, when I worked at Vox, I didn't have to appear on camera. Vox was the brand. People trusted Vox. It's a very successful YouTube channel. But when you're independent, people really do need a connection to you. And so we have found ways that I call it like I appear around the edges of the video. So during the credits, I make announcements. We always try and add a scene in the middle that explains how I designed the motion graphics that's going to help you understand the story. So I think the transparency is super, super important. Without it, you really can't build a base. We use the community tab on YouTube a lot. And that's just to remind people that we're around, that we're working. And I think it's important to show the work that you're doing. Most people don't know what journalism takes, what design takes. And so in a way, it's been more work, but it's been fun to kind of show people behind the curtain of how we put together our videos, and it's a benefit for us as well.
You've mentioned as well now your relation or the algorithm, because you speak about the personalization, but what's your relation with the algorithm? How do you work, this must be also another important part of your work.
It is trial and error to a degree. I've made videos that I was sure are gonna do great and they don't. And I've done videos that I wasn't sure they're gonna do great and they really take off. For us, the best thing we can do for the algorithm, I believe, is just keep up the pace. It seems that if you take a break for too long and then you publish, we notice a difference in views. So it's important that we stick to the schedule, keep up the pace to kind of train that algorithm that like we're around, we're publishing, and that's kind of the best we can do.
But you're training the algorithm, but how did you learn that? Is this like a skill that you've had?
I mean, I think the beautiful thing about short form video, digital journalism, and why I'm so grateful that I worked at Vox is just I've had so many reps. I did 100 videos at Vox at least. If I worked in traditional documentary, 10 years would be a dozen projects maybe. So just the repetitions of being able to do a story every month for 7 or 8 years, you learn what works, and we've tried to take that to Search Party.
Thanks. Maybe one last question and a tip we have an audience, I think, of a lot of journalists. So what aspect of digital content creation could be used to improve journalism today?
I mean, I do think it is the transparency. I mentioned you have to be transparent to build an audience, But I also think in this era where trust might be declining in traditional journalist institutes, it's important for us to show people that we are doing the journalism what it takes so that the viewer sees the difference between us and others. And so it's a blessing and a curse to go on camera and show people, you know, what you do, but I think it's really important, and I think it's a blessing.
Thank you so much, Sam. So I will go now to Paulina. Paulina, let me start with this question. How do you see yourself now that you're, again, like you've been a journalist and now you're on YouTube?
Yeah,
are you a journalist, YouTuber? How do you define yourself?
Okay, so so nice to be here. So thank you, all of you. I am from Colombia. I define myself as a journalist. I have dedicated myself, like for the past decade, to journalism, and I joined a national newspaper that's called El Espectador, that is the oldest Colombian newspaper. And there I started as an investigative journalist. Then I moved to cover environmental issues and health issues. And later I co-created this video column that is a very popular satirical video column in Colombia that's called La Pulla. And it provides news to young audiences and to young people. Today, La Pulla has 1.3 million subscribers, and I quit it 1 year ago, but La Pulla is still running, and it is still having a lot of views and followers and discussions. Last year, I played a leading role in a play that I wrote, and I was engaged in all this theatrical thing and move, and it was very, very nice. So, and the play talks about like a lot of political aspects in Colombia and cruel aspects of our reality, right? That is police brutality, like the gender gap, the social inequalities in our country. So all in the context of a presidential election. So when I created all this content, and now I'm doing a podcast that has to do with history and with humor. So when you ask me that, I don't really know where to put myself, yeah? So I'm a journalist, I'm a content creator, I'm both, and I don't really care, and I don't think people cares if I'm a journalist or a content creator, right? The thing is that I have an audience to whom I'm talking with, right? So I think in my basis, of course, I'm a journalist, and deep inside myself, I feel a journalist. But the thing is that I create a lot of content too, and that I learn from both landscapes what's important in this whole era of having an audience and have something to say to that audience, right? So at the end, I think that what La Pulla taught me is that you can make viral content with rigorous research. And I don't know if I answer your question, but both.
No, you did. And of course, I could ask you now, because you're doing on-stage journalism or performance journalism, but I want to ask you about the switch from the traditional media to YouTube, to social media. What has been this main change? What has brought you? What was the trigger of, switching?
Yeah, so the thing is that we never moved from the newspaper or for the written news to this YouTube world. We were part of a 130-year-old newspaper, and we were YouTubers there in the newspaper. So that's a strange thing, but that makes a huge difference too, because people believes in La Pulla and believes in us because we were part of a newspaper, right? And a very recognized newspaper in Colombia. And what we did, I think, was to reinterpret the values of El Espectador, because El Espectador has done suicidal battles, you know, in Colombia. El Espectador was bombed in the 80s by a drug cartel, by the Medellin cartel. El Espectador was one of the directors of El Espectador that was called Guillermo Cano, was murdered back in the 80s too by the same cartel and by Pablo Escobar. El Espectador suffers an economical gag because it criticizes a big economical emporium, and what this economical emporium did to the newspaper was that it suffocated it financially, right? So all this to say that we were the same old but different, and we were like just making the same journalism that El Espectador used to do all these years, all these 130 years. So the different thing and the game changer for me was like the packaging of what we did, right? Or the format and the form. So it's a matter of form, but the form is essentially the substance of what we were talking about.
It's great, perfect transition, because I wanted to ask you exactly about how do you choose what format for the content you are creating?
Okay, so yeah, wait, that I have these questions here on my notes, because switching in for English is not an easy thing, I can say. Wait a second. Wait. Yeah, so your question is about the format, right? And how do we did this La Pulla thing and all this. And I think it has to do with, and it relates a lot what you both were saying about that you have to personalize the content and you have to be there, like putting your face in front of a camera, because people has to relate to someone, and that makes you accountable too. So when you put your face in your camera and you start talking with your audience start to love or hate someone there, but you start making the information transparent, right? And you start to being accountable to your audience. So La Pulla, I think, is emotional driven, you know, like the emotion. What we make with our format is that we start thinking what emotion arises from what I'm looking in my country, right? So what's the emotion that pops up when I read that in Colombia a social leader is murdered every 2 days? So what's the emotion when I read in the news in my country that a woman every hour is victim of violence? What is the emotion that arises when our health system, for example, that is the discussion that we have nowadays, today in Colombia, is going to collapse, or it isn't going to collapse? So what are the emotions that arises there? So it is rage, I'm mad at that, or maybe I'm confused. So if the emotion is rage, well, we criticize that and we make an argument on that, right? And most important, we put the accent on the things that really matter in our country. And if it's confusion, for example, with all this health issue, well, let's explain and understand and make it clear for us first, and then to the audience. So the point is that we make journalism emotional, yeah? And probably this breaks the laws of journalism, of neutrality, of seriousness, because we inject a little bit of freshness and spontaneity to our content, but this makes that we take sides in a story and make a point, and this makes us to don't be unfair with our audience too and what we see there. So again, the format was emotional driven, but it was also a matter of form. Because another thing is that our scripts could be put in a column in the newspaper and you can read them as a column. A normal columnist can do that, right? But the thing and the change here was that people can get mad with me too, yeah, and can relate to that emotion. And that's a thing of the format, I think.
Yeah, well, that brings me to the, I think I have maybe just 1 minute, Paulina, to ask you this last question, because you speak about the audience reaction. So that's another big question I have is, you work in an environment where you have, in comparison to traditional media, to deal much more directly with harmful content and, for instance, hate speech. So how do you deal with that?
Okay, so yeah, I have never felt so much sexism and so much misogynistic, you said that? Misogynistic attacks from people as when I started doing La Pulla. And surprisingly, I live in a macho country where a woman cannot speak out loud and not speak about politics and cannot have an opinion on something, right? So obviously it was hard, like, to endure all these comments and all the hostility of politicians and their supporters and the lawsuits that came by and the intimidations of the powerful and you know, like all these organized attacks in the media, right? But we wanted to be in the center of the discussion too. We don't want to be in the margins of the discussion. And that's why former President Juan Manuel Santos answered to us and responded to us in a video. That's why current President Gustavo Petro mentioned us when he gave a speech in a public park, and we were very critical to him, right? And we also were featured by the Congress in order for them to make informed decisions through our videos. So honestly, I don't have like a method in which I could answer to those attacks and any mechanism to moderate or to respond. But and it's sad because I have to resist, and my team had to resist to those attacks. But what was in our mind was like, we have to keep doing this because I'm not going to spend time answering people and answering the attackers and the bots. So sadly, in Latin America, you don't have a team that can take care of the mental health of a group of journalists. You don't have that, yeah, right? You just have to do your work, and the work includes being attacked. And it's sad. It's sad because it's like you live with that, and that's it. But I have no problem blocking people. I have, I didn't, and I didn't engage with platforms too. I just don't want to have my time spent doing that. So at some point, I think people will get bored if you don't answer them. But it's sad, and it's a reality.
Thank you, Paulina. Thank you. So, Hugo, your turn. I wanted to start with you and with a quote of CNN. In a recent reporting they did about you, they started the article that way, and I quote, "He may not think himself as a journalist, but he could be the most popular one in France." Do you agree with that sentence?
I don't know. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. I don't know, probably not. But what's interesting here is, of course, this big question, which is, like, journalists have always been asking me this question, like ever since I started the channel, like, are you a journalist? Are you a YouTuber? And to be very precise, at the beginning of the channel, usually journalists weren't asking. They were basically saying, you're not a journalist. And they were like saying, you're doing content on YouTube, you can do journalism on YouTube, that's not journalism. And to follow up with this, we've got today a team of 25 people and about 13 journalists full-time working with me. And we wanted press cards for our team of journalists. And so we had to see the office dealing with press cards in France. And we were like, hey, we have this YouTube channel, this media, we want press cards. And they were like, yeah, but like, you don't have a website. So how can you be a media? Yeah, you're doing stuff on Instagram, you're doing stuff on YouTube, but you don't have a website, so you're probably not a media. So we had to create a fake website and send them a fake website. And they were like, look, now we have, so we like basically did like transcripts of our YouTube videos on the website, and we're like, look, now we're a media. And then now the journalists, our journalists have press cards. So yeah, that's cool. So yeah, it's a very difficult question, and I feel like we had this discussion 2 days ago all together, and I was like, I feel as a journalist, I also feel as a content creator. I grew up, like when I launched my channel, I was 18 years old. I was following other YouTubers doing content about like history, science, sports, whatever. And I was like, I'm passionate about like politics. I want to do journalism. I'll just create a YouTube channel and I'll define myself at the beginning as a YouTuber because I just love those content creators and what they're doing. So yeah, it's probably somewhere in the middle.
But you mentioned the press card story and about the fact of creating your website. Was it all about it? The press card was a website for you, or is there also something maybe in relation to, you know, professional practices, the code? How do you relate to that?
Like, honestly, that was the only thing missing, because then once we got this, everything went so fast and we managed to get those press cards. What's interesting is, for example, the fact of having a press card didn't change anything to the way we're working. Honestly, like, it didn't change much also to our possibility, like, to do our work. Like, the only times we had problems and we needed a press card was, like, during, I don't know, protests in Paris where, like, you had policemen saying, like, are you journalists? And we were like, yes, but no, but yes. Like so now at least with the press card, it's a bit easier and we're able to, you know, do our work a bit easier. But like the rest of the stuff we've been doing, like, you know, when we interviewed Emmanuel Macron, so the French president, first time in 2019, we didn't have any press card, but they still were okay to do an interview. So, and that's, I think you were saying it earlier, I think our public they don't care really. I think as long as our work is serious and we have like those ethics and just like this journalistic ethics, I don't think like people care if we define as YouTubers or content creators or journalists. What they want is reliable news sources. And just to finish with this, like one thing I think is like the name of the channel is called Hugo Décrypte. So there's like my name in the channel, but at the same time it's not really about me. Like people know nothing about my personal life. I never share anything about my personal life or like even like my personal public like opinion about politics or stuff. So like I am the face of the media, but at the same time it's not about me really. And also today we've got like other journalists presenting content on the channel itself, and that's not a problem for people following the channel. Like they see me and they see other journalists on the media and they're like, yeah, I mean, now today Hugo Décrypte is a media. We're like several people working on it, and there's no difference like in terms of views, audience engagement. Like there's no difference at all between content I do and content produced by other people. So that's interesting because I feel like it means that the format is more important than the personification. And so if the format is good, that also means like a traditional media going online can create something valuable if the format is good itself and works.
So yeah, you just spoke about the fact that you don't disclose anything very personal, and so that's not the secret of your success. But still, you have achieved something that most media would dream about. So how, I mean, you have a magic recipe here. How do you explain that?
I mean, it's not easy to say. I think there's like work, there's also luck. I think like the fact of being here at the right time, like being on YouTube in 2015 when so many media were going on Facebook, and I was like, I'm not going on Facebook anymore. Like, why would I launch a Facebook page? Like, I'll just do stuff on YouTube because I feel like this is where things are happening. Same thing like in 2020 when we launched on TikTok. I was like, yeah, TikTok in 2020 is like dances and challenges and like stupid stuff usually. But it can also be a platform for news. Like, there's no reason why this wouldn't be a good platform for news. Of course, like, there's all those questions about the algorithm, about like risks of censorship and stuff. Like, all those are you know, real things. But at the same time, we've seen like we've got 6 million followers on TikTok. We do like about a billion views a year on TikTok, and I've seen how this has opened the media to a younger audience. You know, like 13, 14, 15 years old who didn't follow news and politics before and now get engaged with all this. So, so one is like being open to those social media and go on them and try stuff here. Second is it's not only a question of format. It's not only a question of being on, you know, social media, doing formats that work on those social media. It's also an approach in terms of writing. Like, the reason I launched the YouTube channel at the beginning in 2015 was because I was studying political science and I was really interested into politics. I would like switch on a TV channel, like a news TV channel, and like honestly, I didn't understand much of it. I was like, there was like a political debate and I was like, what are they talking about? Like there was like I don't know, news about. At the time, there was like, of course, the civil war in Syria. I honestly didn't know much about this conflict. I would like switch on the TV channel. We would have like experts or like, you know, history like experts like talking about it. I was like, they were saying, as you know, so in 2003 this happened, and I was like, no, I don't know. Like, you have to explain those things, and so. I'm talking about this because I feel like it's not just a question of format. It's also a question of, you know, writing and the scripts and like how do you approach those topics so they're understandable and accessible for a younger audience. Not only, in fact, in the younger audience, but like people who want to get to understand those topics.
I have maybe two questions, like still trying to because you speak about the young audience, and in fact what is very interesting in your case is that we tend to think that younger audience want entertaining topics, but in fact in your case it's very serious. So how do you explain that?
And like what's funny is at the beginning of the channel I used to put like jokes and stuff in the video, like in every video I did on YouTube, and people were like, I mean, don't do this. They were like literally saying, yeah, you don't need to put jokes in your videos. So I don't know if I wasn't funny or just they didn't care about the jokes. But I mean, this happened and people like, we're following you for news. So just like bring us news. And I found that really interesting because, and same thing, you know, if I started like posting about my personal life on the account, people would be like, I mean, we don't care, like, and I would completely understand, like, people follow the account to follow news. And so I feel like that was interesting to shape, like, yeah, the content we produce. I'm sorry, I forgot the question. What was the question? But like,
why is it so, you know, the seriousness for the youth?
So that was one interesting lesson. Second interesting lesson is the fact that young people, they are interested in, you know, like international conflicts, geopolitics. I'm sure like you guys also can see it, like they're interested in those serious topics. And the idea, you know, and the fact of saying like, oh, it's young people and it's social media, so it has to be fun and like, you know, some like, you have to talk about entertainment and stuff. That's like, not true. I mean, you can talk about those topics, but like there are many other topics that are really interesting for young people. And the whole question there is not the topics. Again, it's the way you approach those topics and you make them accessible and interesting for this public. And so what we try to do is, what I often say is, we try to make some interesting topics sexy for this audience. It's like sometimes you have some entertaining topics we will cover and like try to have an interesting approach of like analysis and like try to understand things behind. And sometimes like we want to talk about this conflict happening in the other side of the world, and we want to make it accessible and interesting for this young audience. Yeah.
One last question, Hugo. Like, what's coming next then? You've achieved already so much. Do you still have some dream?
Yeah, I'm sure I have some. I mean, I've always, when I was young, like I wanted to do journalism. I wanted to, like in fact, do what I'm doing today. So honestly, like I feel extremely grateful and happy to do what I'm doing here today. What I didn't really expect at the beginning of the channel was the fact, I mean, when I launched the channel, I was beginning also my studies at the same time. I was 18 years old and was like, who knows, like maybe one day I'll be able to make it my daily job and like work on this channel. But what I didn't expect is the fact of being able to have a team with me. We're like, again, 25 people today working every day on all those videos and stuff we're doing on all social media. I didn't also expect that this would open us to other types of formats, other types of things. Like for the past year or so, for example, we've been doing interviews, so of politicians, of course. We did Emmanuel Macron again a few months ago, but also like cultural figures, I'd say. So we did Zendaya and Timothée Chalamet a few weeks ago, Hugh Jackman, Christopher Nolan, like some of those personalities. And at the beginning, I didn't want to do those things. I was like, that's maybe not the most interesting, but like by doing it, I'm like, that's so valuable because we're able with them to like talk about so much interesting topics and sometimes even politics, but like with a different approach. And then now basically what we're doing is working on the building other media brands beyond Hugo Décrypte. So we launched, for example, 2 weeks ago, a media brand about helping young people get into professional life. So it's like loads of tips, loads of like presentation of jobs you could do, like some jobs which are not known at all, helping young people with like tax payments, like all those things. Like when you enter like professional life, you have to deal one day. And so yeah, we're working on different formats, documentaries too now. So we did like a documentary in Ukraine a year and a half ago. We're building more and more of those long forms, and so yeah, I'm really happy to work on this.
A lot of projects. Thank you so much, Hugo.
Thank you very much.
So I think we still have a bit of time. I have actually a lot of questions from the audience, but I wanted to start the discussion here with the four of you, and actually just with the title of this panel. So what can they learn from each other, content creators and journalists? Who wants to start? Sam?
Sure. I mean, as I said before, like pace of video is something I think that content creators and journalists can learn from each other. I've always thought that journalists have always been content creators. They're just bound by this common set of rules and procedures. So I really do think anyone can wake up and do journalism for a day. And as Hugo mentioned, like what matters is the format that's presented in. And so I've learned in my career from journalists about those rules and ethics, but I've also learned from really talented artists about visual language and about a creative way to present those ideas. So I think that there is a lot that people can learn from each other, and the faster pace that independent creators need to create at is just a parameter for you to be more creative about the stories that you cover.
I would say that transparency is something that is super, super important. Like content creators usually are, or influencers are super transparent on what they do, how they work. I think journalists have a lot to learn about that, so that people actually know about how they source their information, where the information is coming from, for example, like really, really basic stuff, but if the people would know more about that, I think it would make it more trustworthy, for example.
I think that something that we can learn from journalism and content creation is that the lines are blurred, and that's something that's useful in a way that you can make out of content something great and new and passionate and different from what you are used to do in journalism, right? So I think that first you can translate complex issues into a simple language, and it was something that you were saying, and it's like journalists like take for granted that they are understandable to the audience. So you have to make it more understandable. And that's something that I think content creation, like it's a learning for us. And also that you can speak passionately about the topics that make you like feel something, right? And that's something that was not allowed when I was doing journalism, like rigid journalism. So yeah, I think that something that has taught me, that La Pulla has taught me, is that you can speak out loud of the things that make you mad, and that because living in my country, for example, hurts, and I'm not going to say that in a very lower voice. So I think that rage and emotions are elements that you can take from creator contents into a journalistic project.
I'd say journalists can probably learn from content creators how to adapt to like those really fast evolving, social media, and that is like so important. And I feel like, I mean, it seems obvious today, but like, and content creators, because it's a smaller teams, or sometimes even just one person, they're way more able to, understand those things, spend some time on it, and test and learn on those platforms. So that's probably things journalists could learn from content creators. And on the other hand, like, we're working with the national TV in France today, like they're broadcasting the interviews of like actors and people that we're doing on our channel too, and those are like the interviews I love doing this year because they're, again, so interesting to do. And I'm learning so much from like working with them. Like, honestly, they're not only broadcasting broadcasting with us this program, they're also working with us on like how to build such interviews and stuff. And I feel like we've got so many things to learn as content creators from those journalists. I mean, content creators, online content creators, they didn't invent content creation. They didn't invent journalistic content creation. They've been, for dozens of years, traditional media building like amazing pieces, amazing reports and stuff. And so I feel like building those bridges just helps everyone, helps journalism, I think, as a whole. And so, yeah, we have to keep pushing those links together.
Thank you. I have a question of Jonathan. I think for the three of you, you're on YouTube. And he say, how do you feel the changes to YouTube's algorithm? Like, the second part of the question is, how dependent on search are you for your views?
I mean, I'm probably more dependent on search because we're new. And so I think, one of the main differences I noticed between working at Vox and working at Search Party is at Vox I could do very niche topics in a way, or even evergreen topics that weren't necessarily tied to breaking news. Vox had 11 million subscribers, so pretty much anything was going to do very, very well. At Search Party, when we're small, I could do the best video I've ever made, and if it's not that relevant, it's probably not going to get to the top of anyone's search. So we have focused on doing stories that are going to be, that the algorithm is going to like at any given moment. We think about relevancy a lot more than I did at Vox. But I do have a lot of stories that are not relevant at this moment that I keep kind of on ice for the day that I can do them.
Thanks. One of you want to also respond to that question?
No, basically I don't understand the algorithm, but I work with it and play with it too, right? And start like exploring if this title works and if this thumbnail works. And that was something that we were discussing on Tuesday. That is like probably some video that is death, like comes back to life when you change the title or something. So it's a matter of exploring it. And it's something that you have to try. And if YouTube hides your video or Facebook does it or Instagram censor you, well, how do you deal with that too? So how do you put it in another platform, or how do you start a conversation with your audience in other ways? So yeah, I
That's
don't know.
what you do? You put it on another platform if it's censored?
Yeah. Or I change sometimes the words, or I rephrase them. I don't know.
How
about you, Hugo?
Yeah, it's really a sort of, so you have to test and learn. That's the obvious thing. Like there's no, I mean, it keeps changing. Sometimes you don't understand it itself, so you just have to test and learn every time. That's when the fact of having a regular, publishing like rhythm helps too. And I think like our relationship with algorithms is kind of like a love and hate relationship basically, because to be very honest, like, let's say, for example, we were talking about TikTok earlier, but even like YouTube. TikTok, we arrived on TikTok, and it's the algorithm that allowed us to bring our content to millions of people, millions of young people who now follow news via our platform. I was, when I started the channel, I was 18 years old. I had no money to push ads and show other people my work. The only way for my work to get discovered was the algorithm, and the algorithm helped a lot because, yeah, sure, I was like trying to understand it, but like then it was getting pushed, and so this helped me build my audience. So that's the love side of the relationship. But the hate side, of course, is the fact that you don't have any clear rules. Sometimes things work, you don't understand why. Sometimes you've worked a whole year on a documentary and it gets like so little views, and then you're like, why is that? Like, and the stats, the analytics seems good, so like, what's happening? Sometimes you've got like sensitive topics which are, you don't know if they're censored, if they're just limited, if they're just demonetized, if it's a mixture of all of this, and it's on any platform. And so you have to understand, ways to trick the algorithm and, do as if there's no sensitive topic you're covering. So it's not easy, but I think that's just part of what's happening on social media, and you have to work with it every day. Yeah.
Let me ask another question, which comes from Sida, I think Saida, which for me resonates very much because I work on media information literacy, and she asks, without proper media and information literacy, is it healthy to allow an army of young YouTubers to create content?
I can answer this. So I'd say, first of all, it'll happen anyway. I mean, there's no way. Internet is like this platform where anyone can create content, and so that's just a fact, and it won't change. And I don't think it should change. I think it's good to have everyone like being able to publish stuff. Of course, then, I mean, anyone can publish, and when you say anyone, it is anyone. That's why I think the answer to this is basically education, and I mean that's what she's saying, or he or she is saying here, is education is the key to all of this. We were saying, I think we were saying it earlier, like the audience doesn't care if it's a journalist or if it's a content creator or if it's an influencer or if it's a politician. That's a fact. Like, and when you're on whatever platform you are, like there's not written like he's a journalist or he's got a press card or he's a politician. Like sometimes now politicians, at least in France, are creating content sometimes as if they are journalists or as if they are content creators. So this thing is like completely blurred and like not very clear today. And the only answer to this has to be, I think, it's not censorship, because I think censorship wouldn't help anything, and like it's so difficult. Like, so would my channel be censored because I started as a YouTuber? Would this guy, I mean, that's impossible to do. And I don't think it's something you wish at all. But like, you just need education, and everyone needs to ask themselves like, who is speaking? Why are they speaking? Why are they publishing this content? And yeah, I think education is the key.
And I would just say, I think that that gives us a responsibility of those to show what journalism we're doing. If someone young wants to do what Hugo does, it'd be great if Hugo showed them this is what journalism is, so that they do that. If they're not going to do what they don't know, or they're not going to do what they can't see. So I think it adds more responsibility for us to show what journalism is and the work that we do.
Yeah, and I would say that it's an important question for journalists, like to think that whose responsibility is to kind of learn or teach them or teach media literacy, and that how could we involve in our how could it be involved in our content in some ways. I think also, like I said earlier, transparency is very important, but still, like I totally agree. We already are in the situation that all kinds of content creators, are they politicians or influencers, whatever, they are there already. So I think we just kind of have to, we have to just think about what we can do better as journalists.
And that's also something like we often hear, when social media arrived, more than like 10 years ago, I don't know now. Like we heard people saying, oh, so now we don't need journalists anymore. That means anyone can post, and cover news and like post stuff. And so journalism will disappear and media won't be useful anymore and everything. So of course, like there are some economical problems and like real, problems that, traditional media are facing by shifting to this online model. And that's a real thing. But at the same time, like we need journalism and we need media, whatever the form, more than ever, because that's where you see so many also disinformation, fake news and stuff happening. And so you need those media to be online, to be on those social media, and to do this work to sort of counterattack, whether it's fake news or like stuff that might be happening on social media.
Yeah, and I think that the audience is not dumb, the audience can recognize that who is part from which media, and even though the media is in a huge crisis and people is not trusting media companies anymore, well, I think that it's better to have a journalist from the New York Times saying that, and people is going to be there like believing in the New York Times even though they have like certain questions, or in Colombian media as well, but people knows where the information comes from too, and knows where to pick, like or who to believe, even though they have like some questions on the margins.
Thank you. I think we have just very few minutes left. I want to end with a very short question to each of you that we got from the audience. So who are the content creators that you are following for inspiration? Who should we learn from? It's a hard question to... Yeah, who are the content creators that you are following for inspiration?
I would say, I know my source of inspiration was your work, honestly, like what you were doing at Vox, what you're doing even now, and what you're doing also with Johnny Harris and everything, because you're like, what's interesting, and you said it, like you started in a traditional media. It's an online media, but it's still like a traditional media, doing like content creation and journalism on YouTube like no one did before. Like I know, like when Vox emerged in the United States a few years ago, when I launched my channel, I was like, if I one day can do like even like 10% of what Vox is doing, that's like a huge achievement for me. So I feel like that's probably, so you're like a good reference. I do have to speak to you to see what he's doing.
I'll cheat and say another Vox creator, Phil Edwards. He left Vox a few months ago, but he probably is doing the journalist, content creator, influencer thing in a better degree than I am. He has become the center of gravity of his videos. He is someone that people look up to. He appears on camera in a very effective way, and I just think he's striking that balance so well. Yeah, his name is Phil Edwards, and I really love his work.
Well, I would say a UK journalist, Sophia Smith-Gaylor. She was one of the first ones I interviewed for my paper, what I did, and I think she has like all of kind of the archetype qualities that I would think that is like a journalist influencer. She has a very special, unique tone of voice and niche that she covers. I think, yeah, she's great, and she's also quite a lot like giving and training people nowadays, like how to become like a content creator. And she used to work for the BBC, but she left BBC because she couldn't do like the journalism that she would want to do. So, and then she worked for Vice, and now she's a freelancer. So yeah, that's my. Yeah.
No, for me, Vox also was a reference, the fan mode. But I'm also a huge fan of what John Oliver does, and it was a reference for us. I still recommend La Pulla because it has no political agenda, and it's like a very trustworthy media. And I would say Samantha Bee, I like her a lot. But yeah, a lot of other YouTubers there.
Well, thank you to the four of you for your time and for answering all of these questions. Really a big round of applause, and it was great. And I think we need to now go to the next session, so thank you.